In the previous video, we had started to become familiarized with the design system object language, which allowed us to centralize most of the design of our application, be it a web, Angular web, or native app, or all of them. To do this, what we did was attempt to model the design of an application, initially a web app, for a travel agency. And what we had arrived at by the end of the video was this, where we see a home page which has a menu of actions. And here we can see the tourist attractions or go back to the home page. And we had also seen that we could modify the color scheme, moving from the light to the dark mode and vice versa. At the same time, we had also shown by the end of the video that we could establish this design by hovering over the items. And in the same way, we showed the same for this text. And the other thing we had seen was that we could change, for example, the size of these texts here according to the screen size. And thus, for example, we could see this text in a smaller font, and we could do the same for this one up here, the Ready to Explore. So, for all of this, we had defined a design system object that we had then extended. This one over here. The KB that we see here can be downloaded from the Genexus server. You can download that from the samples KB named My First Design System. I have already done that here, by the way. So, going back to what we had done, we had this home object that was loaded on the master page under the name header web. We had created the design system object under the name travel agency, and we had focused on how we could design these text blocks. This one, which was assigned the class H2, this one that was normal text, this one was main action text, and if we go to header to this one here, this one was H1 negative. So, what we had done was, in the style section, in addition to incorporating font families using the font face rule, which we are going to mention again in a little bit, we had specified those 4 classes. We had selected them, and what we had done was, through CSS properties, given the design characteristics that we wanted. Now, why CSS? Well, because we are developing a web app. Then, at some point, we realized that it wasn't just CSS properties that we could use here, but we could also use Genexus-specific properties. But for now, we'll stay out of that. So, we had defined those characteristics. In particular, we had defined the color, for example, or the font family, or the font size. And what we had realized was that we could take this a step further and not only use values for certain properties, but abstract ourselves a little more, and instead of values, use tokens, which are like constants. In particular, if we go to the token section, we saw that we had defined these 3 color tokens, which we could vary by option while in execution. This option had been defined in this case as a color scheme option that will allow us from switching between the light mode and the dark mode. And how did we make that change? Well, by saying that if the color scheme was this one here, the values of the tokens would be these ones here. But if it was this other one, we would have these values for the tokens. And apart from those variations for the options, we had defined 3 tokens for font sizes. H1, presumably, if we see an H1, this will mean that we will have texts that are headers. Then we have header 1, header 2, and body regular. And then what we saw was that we could instead use a token rather than a value, both for color and font size in these cases. So, Where do we design everything we just mentioned about the hover action for the texts or a change in the font size according to the screen size? Because we don't see that here. Well, we didn't do this in this design system object, but for educational purposes only, what we did was create another design system object and include the first one in this one. And how do we do that? So let's open the object and see. We see that this object has its tokens, its styles, and if we go to the styles section, the first thing we see is this import rule. This is where we tell the system that within this design system object, we should include this other one that we have here. Now, why is it inside a manual module? Well, just for didactic purposes to show you how this can be done in modules. So, what am I telling the system when I write this rule inside the styles section of a design system object? Well, I'm telling the system to embed everything within this design system object inside this other one. And by everything, I mean everything. I mean every token, every style. The tokens, including their options, that is. So by doing this, I don't have to repeat everything that I have already defined. Supposedly, I already have that available here. So, for example, I could use within classes defined in this new design system object without redefining any of these tokens here. And I could also use any of these classes here. I could refer to them with another class, for example. And if we look here, let's see what we've done. In the token section, we didn't define the tokens that came from travel agency, but rather we added new ones, and then we made them be varied by option, by the color scheme option. So let's look at it this way. What we see is that we can define more color tokens that we're going to need in the application. Among these color tokens, we see the white token, used to define a type of white. In this case, I am making it vary by color scheme, although if we look at the value, it's exactly the same. But by defining it like this, I could make it vary. I could have one type of color when I'm using white for the light mode and another type of white when I'm using the dark mode. But I cannot just do this. I can do other things for color tokens. We also can define new font tokens for font families. We can also define font sizes. And we can also define other things such as media queries, which we're going to talk about in future videos. And we can also define tokens for spacing. Now, all of this, if it's defined here, is being defined because we're going to use it in the classes of the style section. And now, before going into that, I did want to show you within the wiki the technical documentation for the design system objects and for its language. We can see here the design system's entry, and for example, we see that we have the design system objects documentation, where we will be able to look at styles, properties, classes, and within the style section, we will look at the rules. And among those rules, we find the import rule. And if we look at the syntax here, we see that we can not just import a design system object in its entirety, but we can also import only its token section, for example, or only its style section, for example. And besides, we don't have to import a design system object. We could also import CSS files knowing the path of the file, or including the CSS file in the KB and using the gxFile function. Now we are moving into the include rule. And as you can see, it is being used here. Now before, an include of h1 negative is being conducted here. Now h1 negative is a class. It is a class that comes from the imported design system object. It's this one here. It's the one that provided a style for the main texts. And if we look here, we have many properties that have been defined to which we have given a value. Among them, we have the color property and we have the font family property. These two properties are being used by giving their value directly. We're not using tokens as we did in H2, for example. For color, we are using the on-surface token, but for font family, we're not using a token because we don't have tokens defined for font families. We only have tokens defined for font sizes. So, what happened here? Why do we have the same H1 negative class specified that we had already specified in the design system objects that we import? Well, if we look here, what we're doing is we are redefining for that class that all the properties that it has will continue being the same, but for these two, the properties change. We are overriding them in a way. And why? Well, actually, the execution value will not change, but what we're doing is we're improving the language by using tokens that were not being used in the previous design system object. So, what we're doing is we're using the color token, the white token that we mentioned a little while ago in the token section. And for font family, we're also using a font family, one that is defined as a token in the token section here. So, all the other properties that I am not giving a value to will remain exactly as the ones you see here. And of course, I am overriding two properties that were already specified in the class, but I might as well extend the class and add other ones too. So, I specified the H1 negative class for that because I wanted to modify two properties. And if we go into the H1 class, it did not exist in the other design system object. And I know that, for example, by going Ctrl F to search, and I specify point H1. And I see that there was no point H1 class. We have the H1 negative, and also that the H1 dot that we're looking for is not something that defines a class, but it refers to a token, to the H1 token, the font size H1 token that we have over here. This H1 is known by Genexus, and Genexus knows that it is a token and not a class. So I am specifying an H1 class that does not come from the other design system objects, and to specify it, I could write all the properties of the token and give it values, or, as I do in this case, include all the properties, all the definitions that come from the H1 negative class in this token. So, what properties are those? All the ones that we had here in H1 with these considerations where these two are overwritten. What for, you might ask? Well, so as not to have to repeat everything. I pull in all the H1 negative definitions, and what I do is I modify the color definition. So instead of white, I am going to use the black token. So again, what I am doing is I'm overriding a property that came from this other class. But I could just as well expand and add a property that wasn't included in the previous one. And if I go to the we key, we will see within the include rule, and over here we have the syntax, that it allows us to include many classes, not just one. And in this way, I can compose within one class several other ones. I can have a class that only doesn't include of many others, and what I'm doing there is a composition, a net composition and nothing else, which would be equivalent to when I want to use this class, instead of using this class for the control, unite all the other classes I'm including, or I can also add new properties in this new combined class. And given that we are already discussing this, let's look at the media rule. We are going to analyze this in the next video, but if we go to Genexus, we can already see that we are using that rule here to redefine the values of the H1 negative. We are changing the font size for H1 negative according to what? According to the screen size. And that's what we're going to discuss in the next video.